The mountain man stood in the shadows of the pine trees, watching the woman seated on the weathered porch of her small cabin, her fingers moving steadily through fabric, by nothing but the pale light of the moon. Ethan Holbrook had been tracking an elk through these Montana mountains for 3 days when he stumbled upon this isolated homestead just outside Dillon, and something about the sight of her working in near darkness made him forget entirely about his hunt. It was late summer in 1878, and the nights were beginning to carry the first whispers of autumn chill. Ethan shifted his considerable weight, his muscled frame causing a branch to crack beneath his boot. The woman's head snapped up, her needle pausing mid-stitch. Even from this distance, he could see the wariness in her posture, the way her body tensed like a deer sensing danger. "Who is there?" Her voice carried across the clearing, steady despite the obvious fear. "Show yourself or I will shoot." Ethan raised his hand slowly, stepping into the moonlight. His long, dark hair hung past his shoulders, and his thick beard covered much of his face, but he hoped his open palms would communicate peaceful intent. "Did not mean to startle you, miss. Just passing through, tracking game." The woman stood, and he could see her more clearly now. She was slender, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing a simple dress that had seen better days. There were patches on the patches, and even in the dim light, he could see the careful, tiny stitches that held the garment together. She held no gun that he could see, but her chin lifted defiantly. "These are private lands. You have no business being here." "You are right," Ethan acknowledged, taking a careful step back. "I will be on my way." "But miss, if you do not mind my saying, you ought not to be straining your eyes in the dark like that. It is not good for you." "My eyes are my own concern," she replied sharply, but something in her voice wavered. "Good evening to you." Ethan nodded and retreated into the forest, but he did not go far. He made camp a mile away, near a cold stream, but sleep would not come. He kept seeing that woman, bent over her mending by nothing but moonlight, her fingers working ceaselessly even as the hour grew late. There was something desperate in that image, something that spoke of hardship and struggle that no woman should have to endure alone. When morning came, Ethan made his way down the mountain toward Dillon. The town was small but growing, with a main street of wooden buildings and dirt roads that turned to mud when it rained. He knew the general store well, having traded there many times over the years. The proprietor, a balding man named Samuel, greeted him warmly. "Ethan Holbrook. I thought you were up in the high country for the season." "I am," Ethan replied, his eyes scanning the store's inventory, "but I need to purchase some things. Lanterns. Do you have good ones, the kind that burn steady and bright?" Samuel's eyebrows rose. "Since when do you need more than that old tin lantern you have been carrying around for years?" "They are not for me," Ethan said simply. He selected 2 well-made brass lanterns with clear glass chimneys, the finest the store had to offer. He also purchased several containers of lamp oil and a box of matches. "I need these wrapped well. They need to make a journey." As Samuel wrapped the items in brown paper and twine, he studied Ethan with open curiosity. "You are not the gift-giving type, Holbrook. Who is the lucky recipient?" "A woman I saw. She was mending clothes by moonlight." Ethan counted out coins from his leather pouch. "That is not right. Nobody should have to work in the dark like that." Samuel's expression shifted to something more serious. "Where was this?" "Up past the northern ridge. Small cabin, alone." "That would be Nora Zimmerman," Samuel said quietly, pushing the wrapped parcel across the counter. "Widow. Her husband died 2 winters back. She takes in mending and washing to survive. Does not accept charity, that one. Too proud." "This is not charity," Ethan said firmly, gathering the parcel into his arms. "She earns her rest. These are just tools to help her get it." The journey back up the mountain took most of the morning. Ethan knew he should return to his hunting, to his solitary life in the high places where he felt most at home. He had been alone for 32 years, save for brief trips to town for supplies. After his family had been killed in a Sioux raid when he was barely 18, he had fled to the mountains and never looked back. Human companionship felt dangerous, like something that could be torn away at any moment. But something about Nora Zimmerman had worked its way under his skin like a burr. He approached the cabin in full daylight this time, making plenty of noise so she would hear him coming. The door opened before he reached the porch, and Nora stood in the doorway, a genuine rifle in her hands this time. "You again," she said, neither welcoming nor openly hostile. "I thought I told you to move along." "You did," Ethan agreed, stopping a respectful distance away. He set the parcel on a tree stump. "But I brought you something, for your work, so you do not have to strain your eyes anymore." Nora's brow furrowed. "I do not need anything from you." "I know you do not," Ethan said carefully, "but you deserve better than working by moonlight. These are just lanterns. Good ones. They will give you light so you can rest your eyes when the sun goes down." She was quiet for a long moment, the rifle slowly lowering. "Why would you do this? You do not know me." "I know you work too hard," Ethan said simply. "And I know what it is to be alone and struggle. Let me help. No strings, no expectations, just lanterns." Nora's dark eyes searched his face, looking for deception or ulterior motive. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she leaned the rifle against the doorframe and stepped down from the porch. She approached the parcel slowly, unwrapping it with careful fingers. When she saw the brass lanterns gleaming in the sunlight, her breath caught. "These are expensive." "Too expensive." "They are already bought," Ethan said, "and they are of no use to me. I live in a cave half the year and sleep when the sun sets. But you could use them. You could work in comfort, or better yet, stop working when darkness comes and rest like you ought to." Nora lifted one of the lanterns, turning it over in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly. "I do not understand you, Mr. Holbrook. Ethan Holbrook, Mr. Holbrook. Men do not just give gifts without wanting something in return." "I want you to rest," Ethan said honestly. "That is all. You were hurting yourself working in the dark like that. It was not right to see." A tear slipped down Nora's cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. "I apologize. It has been a long time since anyone showed me kindness. Thank you." "These will help tremendously." "You are welcome, Miss Zimmerman." Her eyes widened. "How did you know my name?" "The storekeeper told me. He said you are a widow, that you take in Mending." Ethan shifted his weight, suddenly uncertain. "I am sorry for your loss. Thank you." Nora's voice was soft now, some of her defensive walls coming down. "My husband, Thomas, he was a good man. He went out hunting one winter and never came back. I found him 3 days later. His heart had given out. That must have been hard." "It was. Still is." She looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time. He was enormous, broad-shouldered and thick with muscle from years of hard living in the mountains. His hands were scarred and rough, his face weathered by sun and wind. But his eyes were kind, a warm brown that held genuine concern. "Would you like some coffee? It is the least I can do." Ethan knew he should refuse, should return to his mountain and his solitary life, but he found himself nodding instead. "I would like that." Nora's cabin was small but immaculately kept. Every surface was scrubbed clean, every item in its proper place. A basket of mending sat by the single window, shirts and trousers and dresses waiting for her needle. The morning sun slanted through the glass, illuminating the tiny room with golden light. She poured coffee from a pot on the wood stove, and they sat at her small table. The coffee was weak, likely stretched to make her supplies last longer, but Ethan drank it without comment. "You live alone up here?" Nora asked, cradling her own cup. "Mostly. I have a place in the high country. Trap and hunt for pelts, do some guiding work in the summer when tourists come through." He paused. "It is a simple life, but it suits me." "Do you not get lonely?" The question caught him off guard. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely is safer than the alternative." Nora studied him over the rim of her cup. "You lost someone too?" It was not a question. Ethan nodded slowly. "My family, long time ago. Raiders attacked our homestead when I was 18. I was out checking traps. By the time I got back, they were all gone. Mother, father, 2 sisters." "I am so sorry." Nora reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his scarred knuckles. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through him. "That is a terrible burden to carry." "We all carry something," Ethan said quietly, acutely aware of her hand on his. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing more easily than either expected. Nora told him about her life before Thomas died, about the dreams they had shared of making their homestead prosper. Ethan found himself sharing stories of the mountains, of the wildlife and the changing seasons, painting pictures with his words of the wild places he loved. When he finally stood to leave, Nora walked him to the door. "Thank you again for the lanterns, and for the company. It has been nice to talk to someone." "I enjoyed it too," Ethan said, and meant it. "Miss Zimmerman, would it be acceptable if I checked on you from time to time, just to make sure you are doing well? This is isolated country for a woman alone." Nora hesitated, then nodded. "I would like that. But only if you let me feed you when you visit. It is the least I can do." "Deal." Ethan extended his hand, and she shook it firmly. Her hand was small in his massive palm, but her grip was strong. As Ethan made his way back into the mountains, he felt something shift inside his chest, like a door long rusted shut beginning to creak open. He told himself he was simply being neighborly, that anyone would do the same for a woman struggling alone. But he knew it was more than that. Something about Nora Zimmerman had reached past his careful defenses. The next week, Ethan found himself making excuses to return to the valley. He brought her a freshly killed deer, which she accepted with gratitude, helping him butcher it on her porch. Her knowledge of the work impressed him. She was no delicate town woman, but someone who understood the harsh realities of survival. "Thomas taught me," she explained as they worked. "He said I needed to know how to do everything myself, just in case." I suppose he was right, though I wish he had been wrong. "He took good care of you," Ethan observed. "He did." Nora's knife moved expertly through the meat. "But he has been gone 2 years now. At some point, I suppose I need to stop living in the past and think about the future." "What does your future look like?" Nora paused, considering. "I do not know any more. I always thought I would have children by now, a full house and a thriving farm. Instead, I have a cabin that is falling apart and enough mending work to keep me busy until I am old and gray." She glanced at him. "What about you? What does your future hold?" "More of the same, I suppose," Ethan said, but the words felt hollow. For years, that answer had satisfied him. Now, suddenly, it seemed like a prison sentence. They worked in companionable silence, the meat soon hanging in strips to dry. Nora insisted on cooking them lunch, frying venison steaks with wild onions she had gathered. As they ate, Ethan noticed the way the sunlight caught in her dark hair, the way her smile transformed her entire face. He was in trouble, and he knew it. Over the following weeks, Ethan's visits became more frequent. He found himself inventing reasons to come down from the mountain, always bringing something useful. Firewood he had split, fish from the cold streams, herbs he had gathered. Nora welcomed him each time, and their conversations grew deeper, more personal. She told him about growing up in Illinois, about coming west with Thomas seeking adventure and opportunity. She spoke of the first harsh winter, of nearly starving, of slowly learning to adapt to this unforgiving land. She talked about her parents, who she had not seen in 6 years, and wondered if they even knew she was widowed. Ethan shared his own history more reluctantly, but Nora had a way of drawing words from him that no one else ever had. He told her about his sisters, about his mother's laugh, about how his father had taught him to track and hunt. He spoke of the guilt that still haunted him, the feeling that he should have been there to protect them. "You would have died too," Nora said gently one afternoon as they sat on her porch, watching storm clouds gather over the mountains. "You could not have stopped what happened. All you could do was survive, and you did." "Sometimes survival feels like cowardice," Ethan admitted. "It is not." Nora's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "It is the bravest thing you could do. You kept living when it would have been easier to give up. That takes courage." Ethan looked down at their joined hands, at the way his rough, scarred fingers wrapped around her smaller ones. When had this happened? When had this woman become so important to him that the thought of returning to his solitary mountain felt like exile? "Nora," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, her dark eyes serious. "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you." The words came out rough, unpracticed. "I know it has not been long, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know. You have changed something in me, made me want things I thought I had given up on years ago." Nora's breath caught, tears filling her eyes. "Ethan, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted quickly. "I know you are still grieving Thomas. I do not expect anything. I just wanted to be honest with you." "Let me finish," Nora said, squeezing his hand. "I was going to say that I feel the same way. It terrifies me because I swore I would never put my heart at risk again. Losing Thomas nearly destroyed me, but you have become so important to me, and I do not want to lose what we have." "You will not," Ethan promised. "I am not going anywhere." The storm broke then, rain pouring down in sheets, but neither of them moved. They sat on the porch, hands clasped, watching nature's fury together. When lightning split the sky, Ethan pulled Nora closer, and she came willingly, resting her head against his broad shoulder. "Stay tonight," Nora said softly. "The storm is too dangerous to travel in." Ethan knew he should refuse, knew that staying would change everything between them, but he found himself nodding instead. "I will sleep on the floor. I do not want to compromise you." Nora smiled against his shoulder. "You are a good man, Ethan Holbrook." "I am trying to be." That night, as the storm raged outside, Ethan lay on the floor wrapped in blankets Nora had provided. She was in her bed on the other side of the small room, but he was intensely aware of her presence, of every small sound she made. Sleep was a long time coming. In the morning, the world was washed clean and new. They ate breakfast together as sunlight streamed through the window, and something had shifted between them. Some invisible line crossed. They were no longer just friends, no longer just two lonely people who had found each other. They were something more, something with potential and possibility. "I should get back," Ethan said reluctantly. "I have trap lines to check. When will you return?" Nora asked, not bothering to hide her disappointment. 3 days, maybe 4. He stood, gathering his things. At the door he paused, then turned back to her. "Nora, I want to court you properly. With your permission, I would like to call on you regular to see if this thing between us is real and lasting." "It is real," Nora said firmly. "At least it is for me." "For me too," Ethan admitted. "But I want to do this right. I want to give you time to be sure, time to heal from your loss." "I am not going anywhere. We can take this slow." Nora crossed the room and stood on her toes, pressing a gentle kiss to his bearded cheek. "You are unlike any man I have ever known, Ethan Holbrook. Yes, you may court me. I would like that very much." Ethan left the cabin feeling like his feet barely touched the ground. The 3 days away from Nora felt like 3 weeks, but he used the time to think and plan. He was 32 years old, and she was 26, both old enough to know their own hearts. But he wanted to build something real with her, something that would last. When he returned, he brought wildflowers he had picked in a high meadow, their blooms still fresh and bright. Nora's face lit up when she saw them, and she immediately found a jar to use as a vase, placing them in the center of her small table. "They are beautiful," she said, touching the delicate petals. "Thank you." "Not as beautiful as you," Ethan said, then felt his face heat at the bold compliment. Nora laughed, a sound like music. "You are learning to be quite the charmer." They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Ethan would spend his days working his trap lines and hunting, but his evenings were spent at Nora's cabin. They would cook together, talk for hours, sit on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they read together from Nora's small collection of books, her voice bringing words to life. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Ethan discovered that Nora loved music, but could not carry a tune. That she had a quick temper but forgave easily. That she was fiercely independent but craved connection. That she had a scar on her left hand from a cooking accident and was ticklish behind her knees, though he only learned that last fact by accident when helping her hang wash. Nora learned that Ethan was gentle despite his size and strength, that he had a dry sense of humor that snuck up on her, that he carved beautiful things from wood when his hands needed to stay busy, that he had nightmares sometimes about the past, but woke quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone, that beneath his rough exterior was a man who had loved deeply once and was terrified of doing so again. As summer faded into autumn, their relationship deepened. Ethan began making repairs to Nora's cabin, fixing the sagging porch steps, replacing rotted boards, preparing the structure for the coming winter. Nora insisted on helping, and he taught her carpentry basics, his large hands guiding hers as she learned to hammer nails straight. One crisp October afternoon, as they worked together to patch the cabin's roof, Nora asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "What happens when winter comes? You will go to your high country camp and I will be here alone." Ethan paused in his hammering. "I have been thinking about that. What if I stayed lower this winter? I could build a shelter near here, close enough to check on you regular but far enough to be proper. Or," Nora said carefully, "you could stay here, with me." Ethan looked at her sharply. "Nora, I will not compromise your reputation." "My reputation is already compromised by having you here so often," she pointed out. "And honestly, Ethan, I do not care what people in town think. I care about surviving the winter and I care about being with you. We could marry." The hammer nearly slipped from Ethan's grip. "Marry? Is that so shocking?" Nora asked, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "We have been courting for months now. We care about each other." "It makes practical sense and it is what I want. But if you do not feel the same, I do," Ethan interrupted quickly. He climbed down from the roof, standing before her. "I do feel the same. I love you, Nora. I have for weeks now, but I wanted to give you more time. You have only been widowed 2 years. Thomas would want me to be happy," Nora said firmly. "He would not want me to spend the rest of my life alone, struggling to survive. And Ethan, you make me happy. Happier than I ever thought I would be again. I love you too." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her against his broad chest. She fit perfectly there, her head tucked beneath his chin. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because once I marry you, I am never letting you go." "I am sure," Nora said, her arms wrapping around his waist as far as they would reach. "I want this. I want you." They were married 3 weeks later in Dillon, with Samuel from the general store and his wife standing as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, but Nora wore her best dress and had wildflowers in her hair, and Ethan had trimmed his beard and wore a clean shirt. When the circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Nora with a tenderness that belied his size and strength, and she kissed him back with equal emotion. The wedding night was gentle and sweet, both of them nervous but eager. Ethan was careful with Nora, mindful of his strength, but she was braver than he expected, pulling him closer, showing him without words that she wanted all of him. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking quietly about their future. "I want children," Nora said, her head resting on Ethan's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Lots of them if we are blessed." "I want that too," Ethan admitted, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I never thought I would have a family again after losing mine. But now, with you, it feels possible. It feels right." "We will build something good here," Nora said confidently. "A real home, a real family, together." Winter came hard that year, snow piling deep around the cabin, but inside they were warm and content. Ethan had stocked them with enough meat and firewood to last through the worst of it, and Nora had put up vegetables and preserves through the autumn months. The lanterns Ethan had bought her burned bright every evening, but now Nora used them for reading or handwork she actually enjoyed, not the endless mending that had once been her only income. They spent long evenings talking, playing cards, making love, and simply being together. Ethan taught Nora to carve wood, and she proved to have a natural talent for it. She taught him to read better, his education having been limited, and he proved an eager student. They were partners in every sense of the word, each complementing the other's strengths and weaknesses. By the time spring arrived, Nora was pregnant. She had suspected for weeks, but waited to be certain before telling Ethan. When she finally shared the news one morning over breakfast, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face went through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, joy, fear, wonder. Then he was on his feet, pulling her into his arms, lifting her off the ground despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are having a baby." "Put me down, you giant oaf," Nora said, still laughing. "You will hurt yourself." "Never," Ethan declared, but he set her down gently. His large hands came to rest on her still flat stomach. "When?" "Late summer, I think. August, maybe September." Ethan's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I am going to be a father." "You are," Nora confirmed, covering his hands with her own. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ethan said roughly. Terrified, thrilled, grateful, all of it at once. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Nora suffered from sickness in the early months. Ethan hovered anxiously, wanting to help but often unsure how. He brought her mint tea that helped settle her stomach, and held her hair back when she was ill, and never once complained about the disruption to their routine. As Nora's belly grew round with their child, Ethan became even more protective. He insisted she rest more, that she not lift anything heavy, that she let him handle all the difficult chores. Nora accepted his care with good humor, recognizing it for what it was: love expressed through action. They spent hours discussing names, planning for the future. Ethan built a cradle from pine wood, carving intricate designs into the headboard. Nora sewed tiny clothes, her hands creating garments smaller than she had ever imagined. They prepared the cabin, making space for the new life that would soon join them. In late August, on a sweltering afternoon when the heat pressed down like a physical weight, Nora's labor began. Ethan had ridden to town earlier that week to fetch Mrs. Patterson, a midwife known throughout the territory for her skill. She had agreed to stay with them until the baby came, and her presence proved invaluable. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Ethan felt helpless, relegated to boiling water and tearing sheets while the women worked. He could hear Nora's cries of pain, each one like a knife to his heart. More than once he tried to enter the room, but Mrs. Patterson shooed him out firmly. "First babies take time," she told him. "Your wife is strong. She will be fine. Now stop your pacing before you wear a hole in the floor." Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, a new sound joined the symphony, the sharp, indignant cry of a newborn baby. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Mrs. Patterson emerged a moment later, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy. He has got your size, Mr. Holbrook. Nearly 10 pounds, I would wager." "And Nora?" Ethan asked urgently, exhausted but well. "Come and meet your family." Ethan entered the room on shaking legs. Nora lay in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant, and in her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the tiniest, most perfect thing Ethan had ever seen. "Come here," Nora said softly, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Come and meet our son." Ethan approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. When he looked down at the baby's face, everything else in the world fell away. The infant had a shock of dark hair and was making small, snuffling noises, his tiny fists waving in the air. "Can I hold him?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nora carefully transferred the baby into Ethan's arms, showing him how to support the head. The child looked impossibly small, cradled against Ethan's broad chest, his massive hands nearly covering the tiny body. Tears streamed down Ethan's face unchecked. "He is perfect," Ethan managed to say. "You are perfect. Thank you, Nora. Thank you for this gift." "We made him together," Nora said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed many names over the months, but now, looking at his son's face, Ethan knew which one was right. "William, after my father. William Holbrook." "William," Nora repeated, testing it out. "I like it. It is strong like his father." Young William proved to be a demanding baby, but neither parent minded. Ethan took to fatherhood with surprising ease, his large hands proving remarkably gentle with his son. He would walk the cabin floor for hours at night, the baby cradled against his chest, singing old songs his mother had taught him. Nora would watch them from the bed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. As William grew from infant to toddler, the cabin filled with the sounds of childhood, laughter, crying, the patter of small feet. Ethan expanded the cabin, adding another room so William could have his own space. They were building something real and lasting, exactly as Nora had promised. 2 years after William's birth, Nora discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1883 they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Sarah, after Ethan's youngest sister. Sarah had her mother's dark eyes and her father's sturdy constitution, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she drew breath. Watching Ethan with their daughter was a revelation for Nora. This huge, powerful man who had once lived alone in the mountains was now reduced to putty by a smile from his baby girl. He would sit for hours with Sarah in his lap, telling her stories, singing to her, marveling at her every expression and gesture. "You have gone soft," Nora teased him one evening as he rocked Sarah to sleep. "I have," Ethan agreed, not even trying to deny it. "And I do not care. This is everything I never knew I wanted." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ethan continued to hunt and trap, but now he never ranged far from home. His family needed him, and he needed them more than he needed the solitude of the high country. Nora took on less mending work, focusing instead on their children and their home. They were not wealthy, but they had everything that mattered. As the children grew, Ethan taught them about the mountains and the wilderness. William, serious and observant like his father, absorbed every lesson eagerly. Sarah, bold and fearless, was always trying to keep up with her older brother. They were healthy, happy children, growing strong in the Montana mountain air. One evening, when William was 5 and Sarah 3, the family sat together on the porch watching the sun set. It had been 7 years since Ethan first saw Nora mending clothes by moonlight, 7 years since he bought her the lanterns that still burned bright every evening. "You ever miss it?" Nora asked quietly, her hand in Ethan's. "The solitary life, the freedom of the mountains." Ethan looked at her, then at their children playing in the yard, then back at the woman who had changed everything. "Not for a single second," he said honestly. "That life was not freedom, Nora. It was hiding. This, right here with you and our children, this is what freedom really feels like. This is home." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder just as she had done so many times before. "I never thanked you properly, you know, for the lanterns, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for giving me a reason to hope again." "You do not need to thank me," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." As the years continued to pass, the Holbrook family flourished. They added one more child to their brood, another son they named Thomas, after Nora's first husband. It was Ethan's idea, his way of honoring the man who had cared for Nora before him. The gesture moved Nora to tears, and she loved him even more for his generosity of spirit. The cabin expanded again, becoming a proper house. Ethan proved skilled at carpentry, and with help from neighbors and friends they had made in Dillon, he built something sturdy and fine. They had a real bedroom now, a room for the boys to share, a room for Sarah, a kitchen large enough to cook for their growing family. Ethan occasionally guided hunting parties through the mountains, earning good money that allowed them some small luxuries. Nora started a small vegetable garden that grew larger each year, and she became known in town for her preserves and baked goods. They were becoming part of the community, no longer isolated but connected to the growing town of Dillon. William grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet intensity. Sarah developed her mother's quick mind and her father's love of the outdoors. Young Thomas was cheerful and gregarious, making friends wherever he went. They were different from each other, but bonded by the love that filled their home. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Nora with a gift. It was a beautiful wooden box he had carved himself, every surface covered with intricate designs. Mountains, trees, the cabin where they lived, small figures that represented their family. Inside the box were the brass lanterns he had bought her so long ago, carefully wrapped and preserved. "I wanted you to remember," Ethan said as Nora lifted the lanterns from the box, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted you to remember where we started and how far we have come." "I could never forget," Nora said, setting the lanterns aside so she could throw her arms around her husband's neck. "Every day with you is a gift, Ethan. Every single day." They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of long familiarity, their bodies knowing each other as well as their hearts did. Afterward, lying in their comfortable bed in their sturdy house, surrounded by the sounds of their sleeping children, Nora felt a contentment so deep it was almost spiritual. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "Beyond measure," Nora replied honestly. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Ethan said. He pulled her closer, his large frame curving protectively around her smaller one. "Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man. Thank you for giving me a family, a home, a reason to live instead of just survive. Thank you for seeing me," Nora whispered back. "For seeing me working in the dark and caring enough to bring light into my life. You saved me, Ethan, in every way a person can be saved." As they drifted off to sleep, the lanterns Ethan had bought all those years ago sat in their honored place on the dresser, gleaming softly in the moonlight that streamed through the window. They no longer needed them for practical purposes, but they kept them as a reminder of where their story had begun, of a mountain man who had emerged from the forest bearing gifts of light and hope. The years continued their steady march forward. William eventually married a girl from town, a sweet-natured woman named Emma who fit into the family perfectly. They built a house not far from Ethan and Nora's, starting their own chapter of the Holbrook story. Sarah grew into a beautiful young woman who knew her own mind, and when she chose to marry a rancher named James, Ethan gave his blessing despite the difficulty of letting his little girl go. Young Thomas took after his father in build and temperament, and he fell in love with the mountains the way Ethan once had. But Thomas did not run to the wilderness to escape pain. He went there to find peace, and he always came home to the family that loved him. Ethan and Nora grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies marked by time and hard work. But their love never dimmed. They still sat together on the porch every evening when weather allowed, still held hands like young lovers, still looked at each other with the same devotion that had brought them together. One summer evening, when Ethan was 60 and Nora 54, they sat in their familiar spots watching the sun set over the mountains. Their grandchildren played in the yard, the next generation of Holbrooks filling the air with laughter and life. "Do you remember that night I saw you mending clothes by moonlight?" Ethan asked, though he knew she remembered. They had told the story countless times to their children and grandchildren. "I remember being so tired," Nora said, smiling at the memory. "So tired that I could barely see straight. But I had to finish that mending because I needed the money." And then a strange mountain man appeared out of the forest. "The biggest, hairiest man I had ever seen," Nora teased. "I thought you were a bear at first." Ethan laughed, the sound deep and warm. "And I thought you were the most stubborn woman I had ever encountered. Too proud to accept help, working yourself to exhaustion." "You changed that," Nora said softly, turning to look at him. Even after nearly 30 years together, the sight of him still made her heart quicken. He was older now, his beard more gray than brown, lines carved deep around his eyes. But he was still her Ethan, still the man who had brought light into her darkness. "You gave me those lanterns and told me I deserved to rest. Nobody had ever said that to me before." "You did deserve it," Ethan said firmly. "You deserved everything good in this world, and you gave it to me." Nora reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically. "A home, a family, a love I never thought I would find again. You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Ethan corrected. "I was just existing before you, Nora, half alive at best. You made me whole again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside the house, they could hear their children moving about, preparing dinner, talking and laughing. The sounds of family, of home, of love made tangible. "If you could go back," Nora asked, "knowing everything that would happen, would you still buy those lanterns? Would you still approach the strange widow woman in her isolated cabin?" Ethan did not hesitate. "Without question. I would do it all again, exactly the same. Every moment, every choice, every step that led me to you and to this life. I would not change a thing." "Neither would I," Nora agreed. She leaned against him, fitting into his side as she had done thousands of times before. "Not one single thing." As the sun finally dipped below the mountain peaks and darkness began to creep across the valley, someone inside lit the evening lanterns. Through the window, Nora could see the warm glow spreading through their home, just as the lanterns Ethan had bought her all those years ago had spread light through her life. That simple act of kindness from a rough mountain man had been the beginning of everything. Of love, of family, of a future she had thought was lost forever. The legacy of that night, of those lanterns, lived on not just in the physical objects Ethan had preserved in their carved box, but in the lives they had built together. It lived in their children, who had learned from their parents what real love looked like. It lived in their grandchildren, who would grow up with stories of how Grandpa Ethan had emerged from the forest one night and changed everything. It lived in the home they had built, in the community they had joined, in the love that had sustained them through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. As full darkness fell and the stars began to emerge overhead, Ethan and Nora finally rose from their porch chairs and made their way inside. Their children had set the table for dinner, their grandchildren were washing their hands at the basin, and the house was filled with warmth and light and love. Ethan paused in the doorway, looking back one last time at the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. He had come from those mountains a lonely, broken man, seeking nothing but solitude and safety. But those mountains had led him to Nora, and Nora had led him home. "Come on, you old bear," Nora called from inside, her voice filled with affection and gentle teasing. "Dinner is ready." Ethan turned away from the mountains and stepped into the light, closing the door behind him on the darkness outside. This was where he belonged now, surrounded by the family he and Nora had created, warmed by a love that had started with a simple gift of lanterns and had grown into something vast and unbreakable. They lived many more years together, Ethan and Nora, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their children build successful lives, saw their grandchildren grow into fine young adults, and eventually welcomed great-grandchildren into the world. The house that had started as a small, struggling cabin became the heart of a large, thriving family. When Ethan finally passed away at the age of 78, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Nora's hand in his. She grieved him deeply, but she did not regret a single moment of their time together. She kept the carved box with the lanterns on her dresser until her own death 3 years later, and in her will, she left them to William with instructions that they be passed down through the generations, a reminder of where the Holbrook family story truly began. The lanterns still exist today, carefully preserved by Ethan and Nora's descendants. They sit in a place of honor, these simple brass objects that represent so much more than their physical form. They represent the moment when two lonely, broken people found each other in the darkness. They represent the truth that kindness matters, that seeing someone and caring about their struggle can change everything. They represent love in its purest form, not grand gestures or passionate declarations, but the simple act of bringing light to someone who sits in darkness. And on quiet nights, when the mountain wind blows through the valley and the moon rises over the peaks, some say you can still feel their presence. The mountain man who learned to love again, and the widow woman who taught him that home was not a place but a person. Their love story, which began with Moonlight and Mending and a gift of lanterns, had become the foundation for generations of love stories that followed. It was a testament to the truth that the smallest acts of kindness can have the most profound consequences, that love can heal the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the person you are meant to find is waiting just beyond the next mountain, working by moonlight, hoping for someone to bring them into the light. The end.